Hi there, Megan Thompson here with Megan Thompson Coaching, and we are here to support you in parenting your highly sensitive child or teen who is stuck in the meltdown shutdown cycle. And today we're going to cover whether or not you should take your child or teen to therapy to solve that problem. Here we have at MTC a proven track record of supporting parents of highly sensitive kids, supporting teens and their their parents in breaking out of the shutdown cycle or meltdown cycle for typically more for children in as little as 8 weeks. And I am also a licensed therapist. And so I've been doing this for over a decade in various capacities and in serving families through the coaching capacity for many, many years. And when we think about being able to break out of this cycle consistently, here at MTC, we've helped our coaching clients, over 350 and counting of them, break out of this meltdown cycle and do that without therapy. We're not their therapist. So let's cover where, when, or how you should be focusing on therapy for your highly sensitive child. And if your highly sensitive child is stuck in the meltdown cycle, therapy is not likely the answer. Now, wait a minute, Megan, isn't that a disservice? Isn't that wrong for you to say as a licensed therapist that somebody shouldn't go to therapy? No. Doctors tell you all the time, I tell people all the time that somebody might not need medical care. They might say that there's a disclaimer at the end of that, right? That there's some information that obviously is individual specific, and we're going to cover that. But it's important to understand that with my specialty and with my expertise, helping you understand what method of service is absolutely an ethical thing to do. It would be unethical for me to say that therapy is a catch-all, right? That's not appropriate. So when we think about the important component of breaking out of the meltdown cycle and what actually helps highly sensitive kids and families with highly sensitive kids and teens who are stuck in that meltdown cycle, break out of this consistently, I have to tell you, it is not therapy. So let's break this down. Now, if your child is, let's make sure that you understand what I mean by the meltdown cycle. If your child is emotionally stuck and they are hitting, kicking, screaming, having daily meltdowns multiple times a day, melting down, throwing things, throwing their body on the floor, saying things like, I wish I were dead, life would be better off without you, life would be better off without me, I want a different family, packing their bags and running away, leaving, just going up the street even, running away to their rooms, slamming their doors, all of this behavior, okay, is a symptom of the meltdown cycle. If your child is highly sensitive and they have not experienced or witnessed significant trauma to include domestic violence, abuse, multiple chronic traumatic events like fires or earthquakes or school shootings, then your child's meltdowns are likely due to a family dynamic issue and not an environmental circumstance outside of the family dynamic. And so it's very important to understand that therapy for highly sensitive kids is not the best avenue of support. It's also important to understand that there is not all therapy is one size fits all, or not all therapy is going to be effective, and some can be quite damaging for highly sensitive kids. So we're going to talk about that today as well, because you might not decide to listen to me about the therapy piece, but you better listen to me in terms of what therapy is going to create even more harm for your sensitive kid. So when we think about the important piece related to breaking out of the meltdown cycle, you've heard me say this multiple times, you have to pay attention to the research that demonstrates that highly sensitive kids are much more likely to change their behavior when their relationship in the parent-child dynamic shifts, which means your child might feel better, they might change their behavior, but it's unlikely that the symptoms of the meltdown cycle are going to go away. if you're just doing therapy. Your child is going to see a professional outside of the home and working with that professional alone. That is not going to work. I ran my private practice and worked for other people in private practice and for many, many, many years, taught other therapists how to run a system like this, and we never did individual therapy. It was not successful in solving this problem. If parents did not want to work with us directly and work with us consistently, then we referred them to providers who would accept less than perfection, and because it was not an appropriate model. And so that was important for you to notice. I used to do all that kind of stuff. Don't do it anymore. Why? Because it doesn't work. So high standards in my private practice, and here in my coaching company, we tout the same responsibilities, because we only do what works in eliminating the meltdown cycle, and our track record speaks for that. You don't have to just listen to me. You can listen to any one of our clients' testimonials, any of those videos. You will hear that parents who worked with us are either therapists themselves and knew therapy wasn't going to work, so they didn't try it, or they tried therapy, it didn't work, and then they found us. Okay, so that's typically how things work for our clientele. 70% of the clients that we work with have at least one parent in the helping field. That means that they are parents. Those parents are teachers, doctors, nurses, therapists, school counselors, etc. So they understand what is missing in the industry of helping children, and they realize that their highly sensitive child is unique and a minority in the child dynamic. So does child therapy work? Absolutely. Does it work to break out of the pattern of the meltdown cycle? No, it doesn't. And I can say that definitively. We've helped hundreds of families who have dealt with the same problem, tried those old results, tried those old strategies, and did not get the results that we helped them get. So when we think about breaking out of this pattern consistently, it's important for you to notice, because you might be hearing from many professionals, pediatricians, teachers, school principals, school counselors who don't have highly sensitive kids, who haven't been doing the research for eons on Google, who haven't been trying the strategies that traditionalists will say. They're going to tout traditional responses. Why? Because they're going to assume that your child is not highly sensitive, and they will be giving you advice related to non-highly sensitive children. Well, your child is highly sensitive. That means that you need to follow advice givers who understand the highly sensitive dynamic and who understand how to break out of the meltdown cycle. And so I'm pretty clear about this, and I'm not here to be sensationalist. I only speak about these issues with direct and specific passion when I know that there is no other answer. And this is a serious matter. If your child is thinking that life would be better off without them, that's a suicidal thought. It's incredibly important for you to understand the children who make those statements, whether they are 5, 10, 15, they understand more about death than what adults give them credit to. You can look at the research around this from the CDC in the United States. This is not something I'm just making up, or that I'm only using my 10 years of experience and extensive training to share with you. There are also federal studies that discuss this at length. So when we understand the importance and the seriousness of the matter that I'm discussing, you can also notice I understand the risks of making a public statement like this, and I am okay doing that. You can get mad at me about it, and that's fine, because it's not my job to make you happy. It's my job to help you, help yourself, help your child feel happy, and to do that consistently and repeatedly. And also feel okay when they're sad, so much so that they don't want to escape their life. That is the life-saving work we do here at MTC, and we're not stopping. So noticing that, let's talk about therapy. Let's talk about why therapy isn't working for your highly sensitive child, why the traditional models don't work, especially if you're following a traditional behaviorist model in a therapy setting, which unfortunately most child therapists are going to follow. And why a lot of these patterns are keeping your family stuck in this dynamic. So oftentimes we will see, first and foremost, a primarily behaviorist model. Behaviorist models like ABA, PCIT, CBT, Even cognitive behavior therapy, which is CBT, touts itself as a thinking and behavior-based focus, but it is primarily a behavior-based focused intervention. And all of those approaches don't support the child in feeling validated as a highly sensitive person. And when you're highly sensitive, you need to be noticed as such in order to feel differently about who you are. Highly sensitive children who grow up in an invalidating environment purely by a mismatch in parenting. Again, I'm not talking about trauma. That's obviously invalidating. When people mistreat you, when you're abused, obviously you don't feel like you're worth it in the world. Purely by a mismatch in parenting, by parents not understanding how big the feelings are, how deep the feelings are, and how many feelings a child is feeling, and use traditional ways to help the child change the behavior, which might be reassurance. Something as benign as reassurance, or something as severe as physical punishment or groundings. Perpetual invalidation for a child who's highly sensitive leads to a higher likelihood of suicidal acts in adolescence. I'm not talking about just thinking about wanting to die. I'm talking about attempts to die. I'm talking about self-harm, consistently cutting, okay? Life-threatening or life-impairing decisions, risky sexual behavior, risky alcohol use, etc. How do I know this? Because that's been my specialty for over a decade in serving this population in the mental health field. And so in noticing what, adolescents don't all of a sudden out of the blue start thinking that they should die, right? This is a simmering pot situation that eventually boils over. And so when sensitive children demonstrate the signs that lead to that behavior in sensitive adolescents, once I learned those signs many years ago, what I was able to understand and teach parents about, that automatically decreased the meltdown cycle in the household. And obviously it meant the children weren't feeling like life would be better off without them. So it's a shift that you can make now, and it's a shift that you should make now so that you don't see this consistency later on. Now, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to help you notice that you're doing the wrong thing, right? Using the wrong strategy. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent, because obviously if you're trying to seek support, then that's a good thing, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And it is important for you to notice how and when appropriate support is being accessed by your family, and what advice you should be following when you're turning this dynamic around in your family. And so in breaking out of that pattern of invalidation, you can look up Marsha Linehan's research. She's had decades worth of research focused on designing the only treatment that breaks down the pattern of chronic suicidal thoughts and actions by sensitive people that leads to chronic self-harm, chronic suicidal actions, chronic hospitalizations, chronic risk behavior, chronic intense drug use. That's dialectical behavior therapy. In order to be trained in dialectical behavior therapy and to do it in an effective way, you need to be able to have received over 30 plus postmasters experience in training just to do the very bare minimum of that type of treatment. And to affect change, you need to continue your experience. So as a clinician who started at that many, many years ago, started with that initial training, I was able to take that understanding and that awareness and all of the research that has been used around the world for DBT and break that pattern earlier with parents of my child clients on my individual caseload. But I did that by working with parents, not by working with the individual child. And so when we think about noticing the work that I never did, which was such behavior work like PCIT or ABA, because those types of treatments train your child like they are a dog. You give them a treat when they do what you want them to do, whether they feel like it or they feel better about it or not. That in and of itself teaches not only at bare minimum external rewards, which is bribery, But it also teaches kids that their feelings don't matter, and it teaches kids to be people-pleasing workaholics at best, which is the exact same symptom of the meltdown cycle for highly sensitive kids. So you're just basically perpetuating the problem and mitigating the risky, intense behavior that we see. But what you're also doing is perpetuating the chronic invalidation. Your feelings, your actions, your needs don't matter. What matters is what you produce for me. And children are not our happiness producers. We as adults are in charge of our own emotions. And it's important for us to feel A-okay parenting our kids as our kids are struggling. And those two things need to make sure we need to make sure that we're not tying our child's emotional health to any rewards that we are giving them. That's very, very important that we make sure that we're not asking our children to perform happiness in order to make us happy. That is absolutely inappropriate as an adult to child relationship. And so rewards don't work. They do not get you the result that you want for your child, which is to raise a healthy and emotionally managed adult who can handle problems without getting accolades for them when they achieve it, right? Because if you're not clear on solving a problem and what you're going to win in order to solve it, you won't solve it, right? And that's really, really important. You can't train your kid like a dog. So it might be fun, right? You might be able to pick nice rewards, quote unquote, play-based ABA, or quote unquote, or PCIT is literally done in a playroom with a bug in the ear, where you're a parent and you're in the playroom and your child is engaging in behavior and you're taught to ignore the child's behavior. And by literally shutting down your face and turning away from your child when they're engaging in behavior you don't want to see, what does that do? It completely shuts down the connection that your child has when they're trying to reach out to you. They don't know how to reach out to you safely. You have to teach them to do that. You can't teach them to do that by shunning them when they don't do what you want. Your attention, support, love, and connection should never be contingent upon your child's behavior. That is conditional love. And we need to raise our children with unconditional love. I love you no matter what. You say that to your kid. But if you are telling your child that they get rewards when they behave well, and then you tell them that you love them no matter what, you are contradicting yourself 6 ways to Sunday. So traditional therapy in those standpoints are not going to work. CBT is not going to work to solve the problem. Why? Because it breaks out of the thinking pattern when this is an emotional pattern. Your child has an emotional overwhelm pattern. Highly sensitive kids are more prone to being easily overstimulated. That is an external experience. And so just telling them that they're thinking differently about it will make them feel better is not going to solve the problem. It is going to make them think they're crazy. And that's so frustrating and so upsetting. And so what happens is kids go to the therapy session and they say to the therapist who's doing CBT, when the therapist asks what the worst could happen if they're worried about taking a test, and the kid says, well, I could, the worst could happen is that I fail. And then the therapist says, well, if you fail, what's the worst that could happen then? And then the kid says, well, I guess my teacher might not like me. Well, is that true? No. My teacher probably will still like me. Okay, so then should you worry about it? No. What feeling should you have instead? Well, I want to feel calm. Okay, let's practice feeling calm before you go take your test. The problem with that approach is that it doesn't support the child in noticing that their worries are not just single-minded like that. They are not just singular focused like that. Their worries are much more pervasive. Highly sensitive kids think about 10 different things at the same time and 10 different scenarios, if this, then that's. And when you're breaking down one at a time and you're telling your child that they're wrong when they think That's going to perpetuate low self-esteem. And so what happens is they don't want to make the therapist sad. And so they show up to the therapist and they give the therapist the right answer. And then they go home, and when you say, let's use the coping skill that your therapist taught you, they say, no, it won't work. Why? Because the therapist never had a connection to the child's emotional experience in the first place. The therapist was using a strategy that works for non-highly sensitive kids. And this is an experience where a non-highly sensitive child is expected to be internally resourced. Internally, they can feel better about something, and then they can think about being capable. Highly sensitive kids need to feel externally resourced. That means that they cannot be seeking external support or external pride by performing well, and then let that lead to their internal motivation to be emotionally and physically safe. Those two things don't work. That pattern doesn't work. So what I mean by that is, if you're using external rewards like attention or sticker charts or prizes or any other sort of party to celebrate your kid's success as a motivator to change the behavior, then your child is going to not notice how they can get from A to B. Instead, they're only going to be trying to get to A to B based on what they think you want to see. So that means emotionally, they're not making choices because they feel safe or because they feel like they can. And so they fake it till they make it, but they don't ever actually make it. It's tiring. It's exhausting. Some highly sensitive people might call it masking, pretending that they are, some highly sensitive adults might be picking up on that language, pretending that everything's fine when internally they're screaming. And that dynamic is a behavior that we see when there's chronic invalidation in the experience. And this is important to understand, especially for highly sensitive people who have started to wonder whether or not they fit the autism spectrum, if they're autistic. And masking is behavior that autistic people will often demonstrate. But if you're highly sensitive, you're taught to mask for a different reason. So this is not just one kind of check the box, oh, maybe I'm not even highly sensitive. That's another training, I'm sure. But when we cover what's going on, what you're doing is you're teaching your child to pretend that everything's fine. And what happens when you pretend everything's fine? You've heard me say this before, right? Kids who hold it all in, pretending everything's fine all day, they're not processing their emotions, they're checking out from them. So tick, 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 boom, right? Eventually a straw breaks the camel's back, and your 7-year-old is pissed at your 4-year-old because the 4-year-old touched their Lego city, and now the Legos are on the floor and it crashed and everything's broken, and they wallop the 4-year-old in the face, and you're like, whoa, that was something you could totally rebuild, and where did that come from? Well, 7-year-old's been trying to perform and be perfect all day long, trying to get other people to make other people happy. The one second they get the opportunity to make themselves happy and it doesn't go well, they can't handle it anymore. Okay? So this is really important to understand. This is not just relevant for a sensitive 7-year-old. This is true for 11-year-olds. 14-year-olds might not wallop their younger children and younger siblings anymore. They might not wallop you anymore. But they will be internally saying, just, you know what, it's not even worth it. I'm not getting the same results. Nobody's giving me any stickers anymore. The sneakers I want aren't coming fast enough. And there's too much on my plate to even earn them in the first place. So it's just tiring. I'm done. I'm over it. And at that point, the shiny objects stop being as shiny. And so we see sensitive kids struggle into sensitive adolescence because it's just too much to bear, right? Think about this. You might think earlier on in your kid's childhood, rewards aren't that big of a deal. I go to work and I earn money, but you don't earn money for the sake of money. You're not doing any kind of work for any kind of money, right? You're using money as a conduit. Money is a middleman. And you're using money to pay for a roof over your head. You're using money to live the lifestyle that you want. You're using money to experience the life that you want, right? And so money is a tool. But when you give children rewards, they're not experiencing that reward as a tool. They're experiencing that reward as an end result. And that is the difference between thinking that rewards and bribery is just an A-OK part of life, and noticing that as adults we get paid, but we get paid not to just hoard like Scrooge or Scrooge McDuck or whatever, right? We get paid because we're providing value in the world, and then that allows us to then take the value that we receive for providing value in the world to then live a valuable life ourselves. And that means that money is just a middle experience. It's purely energy being shifted from one person to the next and being repurposed. So what unfortunately happens is that you end up perpetuating greed, you end up perpetuating superficiality, materialistic experiences when you use money as rewards. And for children, you might not be paying your kid for those experiences, but you'd be paying them in toys or stickers or a combination of all of them. And so your kid starts building a belief that if they do well, they get something out of it. And while that might be true in some parts of life, we need to be able to persist even if we do well and we don't get something immediately out of it. It means we need to assess, is there something better I could be doing? Is this position right for me? Is it me? Did I really do it well like I thought I did or not, right? And so that's the concept of resilience. But if you don't get the automatic reward, like a slot machine, paying out every time, then you're going to lose motivation to keep going. What do we get then? Millennials in the basement. I didn't get a fast enough reward, so I'm quitting, right? So that's not helpful, right? We get millennials in the basement expecting themselves to be influencers and sad that their first video didn't get 7,000 million hits or whatever. And then they just quit, right? So I know that I'm dating myself because it's not the millennial generation anymore. That is the young adult generation. But that is a massive generation that we see in our society that is significantly suffering in young adulthood and had a lot of challenges and failure to thrive in young adulthood. And so we can watch Generation Z and whether or not it's going to follow the same suit. And it's up to us as parents to notice, how are we raising our children? Are we raising our children to expect to get rewards every time that they perform? And to only view their success based on our belief of their success. And highly sensitive kids are much more detail oriented. They are much more aware of the community as a whole. And if they notice that we are only motivated by their effective behavior, they will pick up on whether or not they're truly cared for. And whether you want to send that message or not, your child is going to perceive that you don't really care about them. And that's what leads to the thought process of you don't love me, you hate me, etc. So there's connections here that I hope that we're making in putting these pieces together. When you're seeking professional support that perpetuates the problem, it's important for you to know that. And I am A-OK telling you to not use those types of therapies. Now, let's look at this from a different perspective. As a play therapist, it's also important to notice that traditional play therapy doesn't work. Traditional play therapy puts your kid in a position to still expect them to be internally resourced. They're still expected to generalize a skill from a play therapy setting in the one-on-one setting where they are heard, cared for, understood, supported in feeling any feelings, and without direct skill instruction, expected to then feel better outside of the session. And that also is not effective for sensitive kids, nor sensitive teens, nor sensitive adults. There needs to be a balance of emotional control, validation, and regulation skills taught in addition to systematic skill building. And that is not taught in general child-centered play therapy. It's also not taught in quote-unquote play therapy, where the person is not actually registered as a play therapist or trained specifically in play therapy. So it's important for you to notice that your child might be talked to with toys in the room. And that is not play therapy. So most times we will see parents who are working with play therapists. The play therapist either has very little experience calling them and has no business calling themselves a play therapist, or and so as a result, they're playing games like card games and to get the kid to tell them about their day and distracting the child with toys in the room, or they potentially have experience as play therapists and maybe even a lot of training in that, but the majority of their experience is in and as a result, in serving the clientele that they serve and in the mission that they serve is in serving traumatized children. And children who have experienced significant trauma can benefit significantly from play therapy and can benefit quite regularly from that experience, because internal resources is where children need to start to build those skills. And most children aren't highly sensitive. And so as a result, 80% of the population ends up going to therapy and ends up having some successful results from play therapy. But that's because the environmental circumstances are what led to the emotional damage that needs healing. And so when we think about highly sensitive kids aren't emotionally damaged. They're not broken. What's broken is the family dynamic, the parenting strategy. Not you, not your child, right? Not the relationship between you and your child, because obviously you care and you love your child and you want to help, but the way you're trying to teach your child, that is what's disjointed. That is what's broken. That's what needs to change. And you're not going to be changing that by sending your kid to a session by themselves, or by sending your kid to a session where you're expected to give them rewards, or taught an effective skill set to manage their behavior. All of that is simply not going to be effective. And so I'm happy to tell you that the strategy you're using isn't working, because that would be the ethical thing to do, right? What does work, right? You've heard me say this before. We've already talked a little bit about it. You need to be the one teaching your child to manage these skills, to manage their emotions. You have to change the way that you see your child. You have to understand the highly sensitive trait. And this is something that takes learning and direct instruction from an expert. You can't just read a book and see how your kid fits. We've had so many clients read Dr. Aaron's books and still feel confused about how their kid fits the personality trait. Read it 2-3 times over and still feel confused about breaking out of the meltdown cycle. This is not something that just educating yourself in instructional information is going to solve the problem. You need practical application of that skill. You need support in assessing how you're applying the skill. And we do that with our clients by directly assessing their experiences with their children. And doing that consistently is something that's going to be relevant for you. And in order to have the stamina to break out of that meltdown cycle, because when your child's having a meltdown on a daily basis, you're tired. You're exhausted, you're drained, you're thinking about your kid every single morning and wondering how you're going to avoid the landmines of the meltdowns on a daily basis, or how you're going to even get a word in edgewise before they escape up to their room. And so the experience of even implementing strategies that these books talk about, or the therapist brings up, can be really, really frustrating, right? I saw it countless times. I recommended those books to my therapy clients before I started realizing that direct instruction and support needed to be more of a hands-on approach and a more intense approach than just sending parents to the waiting room with a copy of the book, which is literally what I did. I bought copies and said, here's your reading, here's your bookmark. Your bookmark is the color red. I have other parents who are reading the same book in the lobby, and their bookmarks are different colors, so make sure you don't get mixed up, right? That doesn't work. It doesn't actually solve the problem. And there are plenty of books out there that will give you great information, but that's not transformation. Transformation requires direct and strategic support and a strategy, not a catch-all. Here's how to solve the problem for 700 different kinds of kids. And so when we think about breaking out of this pattern, thinking about it from a global perspective isn't the way to solve the problem. You need to go granular. You need to look at how to solve the problem for your particular child. That means that you need to apply a system that is then troubleshooted and tweaked and personalized for your kid, which means you need to be working with somebody directly. Anybody who's got a drag and drop, here's how to solve the problem, and I'm not here to support you solving it, but good luck, is just there to take some cash out of your wallet. They're not here to actually solve the problem. People who are here to solve the problem are going to be willing to invest their time, money, energy, and education in making sure your particular family sees results. And that's the quality of service that you need to be able to focus on in order to notice a massive change in your family dynamic and to do it quickly. Because if your family's been suffering for years, it doesn't need to take years to turn this around. And so then when we think about being able to do that, and to do that consistently for multiple families, you need to notice who is teaching you. So we covered therapists, right? And whether or not they even understand the personality trait as part of the model that's allowing them to apply the skills that they went to school for and studied very hard to attain. And learning about the personality trait is not something that therapists learn about. They don't teach temperament type. Even in childhood development classes, that we are required we're not required to take childhood development classes in our master's level school settings for most states. We are required to take lifespan development, though. So, think about taking a semester's worth of understanding every developmental stage for the whole entire human existence. So you're going to spend a quarter on understanding kids. And that's required by all therapists. And then temperament type doesn't even, there's just no time for that in a curriculum. And so it's not covered in the professional experience during the master's degree. And then post-master's, most professionals need to take CEUs that are actually going to get credit. And that credit needs to be focused on treating a mental health disorder and providing a mental health treatment. And temperament is not something that is designed, that is needed to be treated. And so CEUs that are going to glean credits for a therapist to keep their license isn't likely going to include temperament because it's not focused on mental health disorder. It's focused on a personality. Okay, so the lower likelihood of finding a therapist who understands the personality trait means you need to have a therapist who is self-taught, self-led, self-directed, and self-motivated to learn outside of what their licensure requirements are, which is where, therapists like myself was able to understand it. But I learned it first because I received training in serving sensitive people with chronic suicidal thoughts and self-harmful behavior. And then, my personal experience is also added to this. So again, it took years and years to even bring this onto my radar. And while I don't believe in chance, I do know that my personal experiences needed to make that a pretty big highlight. Otherwise, I would have just I have a word on the tip of my tongue that is not the word I want to use. Give me a second. I'm going to have to use it because I don't know what else to say. I would have just vilified the personality trait if I didn't notice that trait was in my sister. If I didn't have the personal experience of watching my sister suffer, then I likely would have stigmatized the sensitive personality trait as impending borderline personality disorder and not seen it as a temperament type. Because that's what the research covers. The research covers borderline personality disorder, and even now in the latest DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistic Model, now borderline traits are allowed to be provided as a diagnostic tool for children before they hit 18. So we are, quote unquote, deciding that kids are doomed with a really significant label before they even hit adulthood, and so that's not going in the right direction in terms of supporting sensitive kids. And And so even if I had learned this, in a different way, it still would have been in a way that was stigmatizing, in a way that was, labeling kids as broken, etc. And so thankfully, knowing my sister and her personal experiences being sensitive, and noticing that my parents, didn't, she wasn't a trauma victim in terms of her upbringing, that it created a totally different approach for me in my brain, in terms of being able to see how kids can struggle at that level that my sister struggled, without it being such an environmental issue, or brain chemistry issue. And so when we think about sensitive nervous system, think about being able to break out of this pattern consistently. We think about being able to solve this problem consistently for hundreds of people. You need to be able to notice how your family can solve it as well. And that means that you need to be playful. You need to, you need to engage in a playful way. And so children need to be taught through emotional wellness, and through supportive means. And that needs to be strategic. Like I said, if you've got a lot of exhaustion on your plate, you're just trying to solve this problem for the years that you've been trying to solve this, then it can be really hard to call up being playful. So it makes sense to work with somebody who can give you those play-based activities in a strategic way, so that it is just, you take the head work out of it, take the research out of it. And we can certainly be the ones to support you in doing that and strategically solving this problem. If you are interested in that, obviously, if you're ready to fix the problem, then we're happy to have that conversation with you. Go ahead to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk, or meganthompsoncoaching.com/teen talk. And you can support your children in breaking out of this cycle. That means that your highly sensitive child no longer has to feel like the world is crashing on them, that they are out of control in their own bodies. Your sensitive teen doesn't have to think that life is hard, and that they'll always be suffering. And your family can go on family trips. Your family can go on family experiences. You can take spontaneous trips to the grocery store without meltdowns, let alone obviously spontaneous trips to the park, go to Disney, etc. And all those experiences without holding your breath, without bribing your kid, without feeling like you need to use any of these experiences as a carrot for your kid to perform. And instead, your child feels capable inside their own bodies. They creatively solve their problems. They experience any kind of challenge, whether you think it should be a challenge for them or not. Doesn't matter. If it's a challenge for them, they can experience it powerfully. They can take deep breaths. They can say, you know what, I'm scared about this, but it's okay, Mama, I can do it. And that is the emotional experience that you can experience on a daily basis. You and your family can have that. And we can support you in doing that. If you're ready to do that, go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk. Go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/teen talk if you're parenting a teen, high school age and over. We'll have a conversation about where you're struggling, what your family is stuck in. And if you're ready to fix it and get to the goals that we help our clients reach, then we will support you in breaking out of that pattern consistently. And we'll tell you exactly how to do that on that single phone call. Otherwise, if we think that something else would be more efficient or effective, then we will steer you in that direction. Like I said, if you're in the meltdown cycle and that's the only cause of the challenge that you're having, therapy isn't the way to solve the problem. And therapy could be the way to solve the problem if your family is dealing with a different dynamic than what I'm discussing. So we're happy to have a talk with you, okay? So this is that disclaimer I talked about at the very beginning. Anybody who's a professional with the right mind and a license on the line is going to say that they are not a one-size-fits-all, that they can't answer questions to strangers on the internet with a quick text of information or a quick Facebook post of information. But a thorough conversation about whether or not what we do is going to work, yeah, I've trained my team to be able to assess that effectively. So we can certainly support you in that. And notice whether or not that or something else like therapy would be more appropriate to solve your family's needs based on your family's experiences and your family's circumstances. And we're happy to do that for free. So experience that for you in order to achieve the life that you want. Again, meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk or meganthompsoncoaching.com/